Okay, so far we talked about the taste for discrimination model, but there's some alternatives to this, and so we're going to look at one of them in a little bit of detail. This is so-called statistical discrimination. So let's talk about where this comes from. So the basic idea to start with is in when you're doing a job search, there's both imperfect and asymmetric information. So imperfect, just that you don't have all the information. They don't know everything about you. You don't know everything about them. And asymmetric is that um, each side knows more information about their side than the other person does. So, for example, the employee has a lot more information about their own skills and commitment to work compared to the employer, right? So, when you go to interview, and usually you're trying to represent the really good sides of yourself, but also you're often trying to hide maybe the negative information as well. And so, this asymmetric information means that firms have to do some guessing, right? And we're going to see that sometimes they use information they have about maybe the group that you represent in general to do this decision making. So the available information they have things like references, resume, interview. They're all very imperfect as predictors of productivity. Okay, so that's the information that they have, and then they have to make a decision based on this information. But bias may get involved, and this bias again may not be based on necessarily a dislike or a desire to avoid a certain group, but it could become from beliefs about statistical differences in group averages for various traits. Okay, so let's see what we mean. So employer uses group average. This is their what they think about these averages. They might not. What I'm saying that is they might not actually be the true group averages, although sometimes they might be, but they could also be based on a biased viewpoint, maybe that's common in society, for example, to decide about things like your skills or your commitment to work. Okay, so they see um, they it could be just to take gender and race out of it for a second. It could be things like what school you went to. Okay, so they see your school, and then they're gonna form a perception about you. Okay, based on that. So they say, oh, you went to they see somebody went to Harvard, and they might have a very positive perception about their abilities, right? And they say another student went to a less prestigious school, and their perception may not be nearly as positive, for example. Okay, so they're using this, and they're kind of based on group averages. It may be that they have a lot of experience, and so that they've seen graduates from those schools many times, and they have seen a clear difference, or it could just be based on their kind of perception based on the reputation of the schools without any direct evidence that it's actually true. Okay. And they could also do this with things like your commitment to work, like will a person be on time and working hard, but also will they want to stay for a long time? Will they put in extra hours? Will they put in lots of effort? They're going to also do these as well. And the reason they use these kind of group averages is because they can't see your individual ability. So when you just walk in, they can't tell just by looking at you or looking at your resume what kind of person you're going to be. So they might use these group averages to decide. Okay, so then these influence their decisions about hiring, pay, and promotion. Um, to the extent that your employer is going to know you pretty well after you start working, they're probably most likely to affect you at the beginning, in the hiring stage and the initial placement on this, initial placement in a position, initial pay offerings. But they could also affect future promotion if even after you start, there's still some unknown aspect to this that they then tend to use group averages for instead. Okay, so like I said, these group averages could be accurate or they could be biased, right? Um, if they're accurate, it still will treat people unfairly in many cases. If they're biased, then it treats people very unfairly. Okay, so even if it's accurate, it's still unfair. But if it's biased, then it's really unfair. Okay, so um, let's look at just an idea. Okay, so you have a business consulting firm. They have any to, let me just change this to any group. Okay, business consulting firm, and again, we don't have this taste. Um, we don't have this taste for discrimination situation here. You might feel like what their belief that they have is actually a negative thing, and it kind of is. But I mean is they don't have a taste for discrimination against this group. They don't dislike this group, I guess we should say. So the employer, the employees, the customer have no negative, no negative feeling towards this group. Okay, in this case, it's not. I made a mistake. It's not a racial group. It's actually a between men and women. So the employer believes that on average, young women are more likely to leave the company than men. Now, again, this could be based on their own experience that they've over time they've seen this is true for them for this particular job, or it could be based on this kind of general idea of women being less attached to the labor force than men. Okay. And again, for now, let's assume it's actually real, and then we'll talk about what if it's not real. So the employer, she cannot see the individual applicant's true attachment to work. So just by looking at the resume, these are, say, entry-level positions. They can't see your work history, and so there's not much work history, so they can't see your individual attachment to work. But they do believe that in 5 years, more of the young men that they hire will still be with the company compared to the young women that they hire. Okay, so if this is true, then they might be more likely to hire men. But also, given that they are hired, they might be more likely to promote men or to select them to receive costly training, for example. Okay, because they may be more likely to invest in the young men that enter the company because they believe that they're going to be more likely to be there in the future. Okay, so this is statistical discrimination. This is the idea. Now, let's think about it for a second. So this is their attachment to work. So let's suppose there is a difference in the group averages. Okay, and in the past there definitely was a difference in group averages. It's changing now. The averages are getting closer and closer together. So what it means is, well, you're not really discriminating against everybody. So if you are actually if your commitment to work is the same as your group average, then the employer is treating you sort of accurately, right? But there's a group of people that are being strongly discriminated against. Okay, so for example, if you're a woman and you're up here, so you're way above your group average, but the company is treating you as if you're the average woman, right? And so you're being disadvantaged compared to men, even though the truth is you're not. You're similar to their average attachment as well. And you can also see men who are on the low end of their, like men who are down here, would also benefit from this because they're getting the benefit of the doubt. They're actually very not attached to the labor force, and they're getting the benefit of the doubt as if they are. Just let's see what happens when the distributions get closer together. So actually, when the distributions get closer together, this situation becomes almost more problematic. So in the last case, there wasn't that many women that were above the average for men. So it was a sort of a somewhat fair, if not very nice, but somewhat fair characterization in the majority of cases. But now, as their distributions get closer, if people still have this belief, then it will result in more and more people being treated unfairly. Okay, so here I'm defining treated unfairly is you are in this variable you are just as strong, if not stronger, than men, but you are treated as if you are not. So this is the idea, and then you can imagine. I didn't show a graph for this, but you can imagine if there is actually no difference in the two groups, but people believe there are because of kind of stereotypes in the society, then it's even more unfair, right? So the degree to which statistical discrimination it results in disadvantage, but the degree to which it's kind of profoundly unfair partly depends on how true these assessments about differences in averages truly are. But even then, it's still, even if the assessments are accurate, it still discriminates against some people who do not follow their group averages. So finally, so again, the shape of the distribution determines how many people are treated unfairly. If you're better than average, you're going to get discriminated against in this case, if you're from the lower group. Now, couple of things. This is kind of, it's hard to tell exactly what this would result in. So one idea is, well, if you're rewarded for your group average, you have a little bit less incentive to invest in yourself because you might only get the group average. But other people would say the opposite. you want to send an even stronger signal. So you have to work harder to send a stronger signal so that the employer can tell that you're not the same as the group average. So someone would either be kind of discouraged by this, or they could become kind of an overachiever by this. It's also definitely true that employers' estimates about group average are likely biased, right? Employers are people, and they're going to be influenced by the stereotypes that we have in our society, and these stereotypes often are outdated. Even if they have a grain of truth, often, for example, the idea about workplace attachment, people's ideas might be 10 or 20 or 30 years old, and things may have changed in that period of time, right? But this will still disadvantage people in between. The last one I've already said about they might have to work harder to prove. The final idea is this could create a vicious circle from the feedback effects. So if the employer expects, for example, females to be unstable in their jobs, meaning they're gonna more likely to leave for family reasons, for example, this might lead them to give women less training and less chance for promotion, maybe give them jobs which are not quite as important. But if they're not getting as much training and promotion and getting assigned to jobs that are not as important, they're probably more likely to leave because they have less incentive to stay, right? And then from the employer's point of view, they'll see that their viewpoint was confirmed. That yes, it is true that they were less stable. So again, this kind of feedback effect can make this kind of a self-fulfilling thing that if people are treated as if they're different, it may end up, even though they weren't in the first place, it may end up making them appear like